The article Wildlife Ecotoxicology of Pesticides, Can We Track Effects to the Population Level and Beyond by Kohler discusses how the recent increase in population in agriculture within the last 50 years has led to an increase in pesticide use and the resulting effects of said pesticides. Pesticides are chemical compounds. Each pesticide is a specific substance designed differently depending on the specific action that is required by the pesticide to complete. Pesticides are used in agriculture worldwide. However, this has caused some data to be scattered and or not available to the entire public. But the article has provided some of the main intended effects of pesticides. These effects include the removal of unwanted pests, such as insects, weeds, and or other harmful plants. The pesticides remove insects or the other plants to prevent them from damaging or stealing nutrients from the intended target plant. Pesticides have been used in agriculture for many years. According to the article by Kohler, the first publication about pesticides and the environmental risks they present was in the early 1960s and was called Silent Spring, written by Rachel Carson. For over 20 years, papers have been published on the effects of pesticides while also addressing insecticides, herbicides, and fungicides. Majority of the publications have to deal with research focused on fish and insects. However, interest on pesticides has picked up again within the past 5 years, so some research has started to be focused on birds as well as amphibians.
In this slide, I'm going to be talking about some of the unintended effects that pesticides have on individuals. Organophosphates and carbamates impair multiple metabolic functions in vertebrates, which include thermoregulation, water and food intake, and behavior, along with having further consequences, such as impaired development, weight loss, and reduced reproduction and hatching success. A broad range of pesticides that induce embryotoxicity and teratogenicity in multiple species cause organ malformations, growth suppression, delayed hatching, and embryonic mortality. Pesticides' effects at these individual levels have actually been linked to their consequences in overall populations. Research on humans and rats has revealed evidence for several different types of toxicity. These types include respiratory, cardiovascular, neurological, and immunological. Now we're going to be talking about some of the population level effects of pesticides. Population effects of pesticides in birds have been linked to both neurotoxicity and endocrine disruption. In wildlife reptiles, the only thing linking endocrine effects of pesticides, juvenile population densities, and unexpected adult mortality is the spill of highly persistent organochlorines. While there's already a good amount of evidence, there's still much more investigation needed to further link pesticides and population effects.
Pesticides affect the community level of ecosystems because a community is a group of multiple species in the same location. For example, in a forest, you have the trees, you have the squirrels, you have nuts, birds, lots of different species. So when one part of that food chain is upset, the whole chain becomes unbalanced. This is shown in 3 ways. One way is the parasite to host relationship. So an example of that is when a pesticide called atrazanine killed a phytoplankton, the periphyton gets nutrients and then they infect snails as a parasite. And another one is the predator-prey relationship where herbicides lead to less plankton, which is a common food source. So then predators have less prey to eat on. And the third relationship is pollination, and one effect of that was when bees were exposed to pesticides, and then they became less efficient. Ecosystems are affected by pesticides in many ways. So first, an ecosystem is just all living and non-living parts of communities living in the same location, and these are all affected by pesticides because when one part of the ecosystem is affected, the whole thing becomes affected. It's like a domino effect. When individuals are infected, the individuals change their populations. The populations that are changed make the communities different, and then the communities become different in the ecosystems. So that disrupts just the whole chain of command. So using pesticides can lead to a different way that things are run in the community, like if the food supply is upset, and then different relationships between predator and prey will become different.
Okay, figure 3 is a cause and effect web that ends with the effect of communities and nutrition cycles due to global change with the presence of pesticides and metabolites. Before starting to follow the trail marks, the figure is composed of yellow and green quote-unquote stepping stones. The yellow represents the effects of pesticides and metabolites, and the green represents the effects of global change. For example, when looking at the figure, precipitation and warming are green stepping stones, which means the effects are to be blamed of global change, while the yellow stepping stones, like acute poisoning, on the bottom left of this figure, the bottom right of this figure, is a result of pesticides. Of course, when both stepping stones are both green and yellow, they are a result of both global change in pesticides and metabolites. When starting, start at the global change and follow the trail marks each stepping stone. Each stepping stone tells how one stepping stone led to the next until eventually ending up on nutrition cycles and communities. And that's it. To pick one of the many species that are affected by pesticides and global change is bumblebees. Bumblebees are endangered due to two main reasons: the record temperature highs in the past 5 years and pesticides that make the bee become less active in the colony. Imidacloprid is a common neurotoxic pesticide that was developed in the 1980s. According to Ruth Williams at the Scientist website, reports that typical levels of imidacloprid found in the wild tend to be less active in the nest, less time on nursing water, and had fewer social interactions than regular bees in the hive, end quote. When bumblebees that have ingested the neurotoxin are lazy, building their structure at the nest, the larvae die because of the hotter weather, failing a small population of bees due to the global change and pesticides. And that's it.
So can microevolution catch up? Microbial populations and communities display microevolutionary processes over a shorter period of time. They begin to develop tolerances to the pesticides, which result in a higher capacity of recovery for those populations. There's also partial restoration of freshwater microalgae populations after pesticide use. This has been proven, but there's also little research on it. There's no evidence of pesticide-tolerant bees because pesticides don't directly affect the queen. And aside from evolutionary processes, ecological networks can allow for recovery from pesticide use in a various amount of ways. What kind of research is necessary to help us manage the effects of pesticides in the future? Although they can still be problematic, modern pesticides have proven to be better for the environment than older ones. This is because they have more of an indirect effect on wildlife and the environment, whereas older ones had a direct negative effect on the environment. Climate change will have effects on how environments interact with pesticides in the future as well, just because as the climate and the environment change, that will also change the way that the pesticides interact with them. And as we move into the future, it's important to identify both direct and indirect effects of pesticides and identify any confounding factors that are affecting wildlife populations in relation to pesticide use if we want to get a good hold on the effects of pesticides to our environment.